The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Knights of Ren episode 602. Now, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. You may notice that Rick, Todd, and Nick are not here, and that's because I was gone all last weekend and most of this week at my best friend's wedding in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we were not able to get together and record, so we decided to do something a little bit differently, and this week we're going to showcase Project HoloNet. Now, if you've never heard of it or you don't know what that is, this is our open invitation to anyone. We want to open up the doors to allow for anyone who's interested to create content to work with us and, you know, make content. If you want to write articles, if you want to do podcasts, we would love to help with any and all experience, all of our resources, and just be a platform for the community to have a voice. So we have a great friend, Crawworm, or Lake, if you've met him at Worlds, and he's been the producer of the brand new podcast, Destiny Versus. And this is basically a show that he's come up with where he takes Star Wars Destiny and compares it to other things in the gaming community. The first show is about Magic the Gathering, and this week we're actually going to showcase two of his episodes back to back. And if you haven't listened to Destiny Versus #1, I highly recommend it. He's got a really great perspective on not only the game, but how it works in tandem with a lot of other gaming platforms that we know and love that have been around a little bit longer than Destiny. And it's a great talking point to bring in new players, old players, or just to kind of enjoy looking at Destiny comparatively to other things on the market. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy episodes 2 and episodes 3 of Destiny Versus from Lake.
Hey everyone, it's Lake, and I'm back with another episode. I've invited an old friend and longtime Destiny player onto the show to talk about player and game etiquette. If anyone listening would like to submit any ideas they would like to hear in an upcoming shows or thinks that they would make for a good guest, I would like to invite you to email me at crawwormgaming@gmail.com. That's crawwurmgaming@gmail.com. And finally, if any of you out there are looking for a new YouTube channel with gameplay content, I recommend you head on over to Crawworm Gaming, where I will be uploading gameplay every day. And now, let's get on to the show. Hey Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started here?
Sure, I'm from Nashville. I got into Destiny right after Spirit of Rebellion dropped, and have been hooked ever since. I'm mostly a casual player, although I do go to some of the competitive events kind of in my area.
All right, well, let's dive into it. So we're going to be talking about player etiquette and game etiquette. So let's just dive right into player etiquette. All right, here's my first question. Do you shake hands with your opponent? Do you shake your hands before or after?
I do. I offer to shake hands after always. I don't usually when it starts. I'm not exactly like a germaphobe, but I'm not usually that eager to like shake people's hands in a big crowd setting. But yeah, I do at least shake my opponent's hand at least once before the game is over.
I think I generally do, but I don't think I ever extend. I think my opponents usually extend, and I will just shake it. It's interesting. Handshaking isn't something that should be important, but for some reason it gets brought up a lot, whether or not you should do it, whether doing it makes you a good sport or maybe even a bad sport. But I don't know. It's a thing, and people talk about it. Like, some people think that shaking hands is, if you offer a hand after you win, it's rude, or maybe it's just rude to not accept. Do you think it's poor etiquette to not shake someone's hand after a match or even before it?
I think it kind of depends on the mood of you and your opponent. I mean, if he sits down and you guys are kind of jovial the whole time and, it's good vibes, I don't think anybody's going to walk away feeling sore if you don't shake hands. But I think, especially if you win and your opponent is obviously a little bit, upset about it, I think it's a good gesture to offer a handshake just to, kind of a, hey, good game.
See, that's interesting. And you can usually tell when your opponent's upset at a loss. I don't think I usually extend the hand after I win. And we'll get into saying whether you should say good game or not. But if they extend, I'll extend. Otherwise, I just leave it be.
Yeah, come to think of it, I usually don't. I'm not usually the one who extends my hand. Although I will happily shake hands with anybody I'm playing against.
I feel like it's on the loser to extend the hand because the winner, if you extend your hand, that's where the saltiness can occur. But it should never occur from a losing player saying good game or well played to a winner.
No, that's interesting. See, I never would have thought of that. I would think hey, I won rather than just take my game and walk away now. I think it's a show of respect to say hey, I appreciate you playing me. I don't know. As someone who lost, I don't think I would ever be offended if somebody who just beat me, offered to shake my hand.
That's an interesting outlook. Not everyone's like that. But yeah, you are right. The notion of extending hey, I enjoyed playing you, even though I beat you. Okay, well, interesting. That's two different approaches to shaking hands. But let me ask you this: have you ever extended a hand for a shake and then just nothing?
I haven't actually. No.
Yeah, I feel
That's never happened to me.
So I feel like the deal is if someone says good game or anything and they extend a hand, you win or you lost, just shake the guy's hand. It's a game of destiny. It's not like he killed your family or anything. You're just playing a game of destiny. Just be a good sport, shake the person's hand, and move on. And that's all there has to be to it. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. It's just like a simple gesture of good sportsmanship. That's it.
Yeah, I don't think you really have anything that you can prove by refusing to shake somebody's hand. I mean, you're not going to accomplish anything by being rude like that.
Yeah, it's just awkward to the other person. You're just like, oh, okay, all right. I'll let you deal with that. I'm going to go now. All right, let's move on to let's move on to shuffling. So when you're sitting across from your opponent, and we're talking about tournament play, we're not talking about casual play. In tournament play, you present to cut or to shuffle. Do you pick up their deck and do you start shuffling it, or do you only cut it?
I leave it sitting on the table. I, approximately cut it in half, pick up the bottom stack, set it on top, and then just pass the deck back over. I never really fully pick up the deck and shuffle or cut. I usually leave it sitting on the table, which is what, in my experience, at least most of my opponents have done as well.
See, I think that's interesting. I will never just cut. I always pick up and shuffle. That's probably because I come from a Magic background. And a few years ago, there was a whole slew of cheaters caught on camera, and they were manipulating the decks while they were shuffling them. And so what they're doing is they're stacking their deck, and if you only cut the deck would still be stacked. So you have to shuffle. You have to shuffle there. Yeah, so I always shuffle. I doubt there are many, if anyone at all, that cheats like that in Destiny, but it's just ingrained to my mind that I pick up the deck and I shuffle. You should go look it up on YouTube sometime. You can just look up the videos of them shuffling, and it's ridiculous. And after you see those videos of them shuffling, you'll never look at cutting a deck the same after that. Yeah. So what they would do, and this isn't a Magic podcast, but they could do stuff like they'd shuffle a land, 2 non-lands, a land, 2 non-lands, a land, 2 non-lands, and if you present and you only cut, they've got perfectly stacked decks. So the equivalent in Destiny would be something like 2 upgrades, 3 events, 2 upgrades, 3 events, 2 upgrades, 3. And that, you pick up, you shuffle, you get to avoid all that. So maybe I've changed your mind on that.
Maybe.
Okay. All right, let's talk about how you approach dice, just overall. So here's the first one, or the first part of that is how you actually roll the dice. I'm talking dice towers, I'm talking dice boxes, and I'm talking dice trays. How do you feel about those?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I personally, when I roll, I come from a board gaming and a miniatures gaming background. So what I try to do is kind of hold my hand kind of toward me and then just kind of pitch the dice up in the air just a little bit so that they land in front of me and don't fly across the table, but they still get enough of kind of a spin on it. I'm not dropping them straight out of my hand where I can fix the side. I just try to kind of give them a little pitch. I do think it's interesting when people come with like trays to roll them into. It's not a bad idea because then you can really kind of chuck the die into the tray and, it won't get away from you. That's actually probably the better way to go. If you're concerned that your opponent might be cheating or you might be accused of cheating, I think the dice tray is probably a really good idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so. The thing with trays, it's really two things. And the first thing is how accurate are you at rolling? Like when I roll, I'll hit the table and I'm not gonna hit their dice on the table. I can make it fairly accurate. I've seen people, they'll put a hand down on the table flush and they'll roll into the hand. So all the dice knock into the hand and can't go anywhere else really. They just lose all their momentum when they hit the hand. So the second part of that is when we're talking about trays, I think it depends on what kind of tray you're using. If it's one of those long boxes that's relatively low to the table, I think those are fine. But I don't know if you've seen them. They have they almost look like mouse pads, and you can button them up so they curl up. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep, I've seen those.
Yeah, I dislike those, and honestly, I think I've never had someone use one at a tournament on the other side of the table for me. But I think if I did, I would probably ask them not to use it because they can obscure die rolls, and I don't like that.
That's interesting. I had somebody in a tournament I was playing use kind of like almost like paper cardboard version of one of those. I didn't think it was too bad. I did think the real downside of the dice tray, though, is, when you're in a competitive match, your space is pretty limited. You've usually only kind of barely got enough room for your playmat and all your gear. So that dice tray is kind of taking up a lot of real estate is kind of the thing that was annoying for me about it.
Yeah, maybe not even just for you, but maybe it's something that's inconsiderate for the other players around you. Now, personally, I'll say that I've never seen them take an amount of room that's inappropriate. But if you have a really ridiculous dice tray that's just huge, maybe it's not okay to use it.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Have you ever seen a dice tower being used?
I have actually never seen a dice tower in Destiny. I've seen them a lot in the board game community, but I've never seen anybody bring one to a Destiny match.
Yeah, I've never seen one either. I can't imagine that they wouldn't be anything short of extremely noisy.
Yeah, I don't think I would like it. It would be noisy and kind of gimmicky. The dice could get stuck inside, and then it's like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, I think dice towers are a no-no in Destiny. I think you also have to... Sometimes you have to reach in there and pull out the dice. If you have to reach in there and pull out the dice, no way. Because you can... It's so easy to just... A little bit of sleight of hand. You don't even have to be good at it just to change the way it's facing when you pull it out. If I can't see your die roll, that's a problem.
That's just straight up awkward to have to reach into your dice tower to get your dice out.
Right. We've been talking about tournament, but we'll extend this over to casual just for this because this is something that happens a lot more in casual and a lot less in tournament. But eating and drinking at tables?
Yeah, this is a tough one because, everybody likes to have... If you're sitting around playing Destiny for 5 or 6 hours, you at least like to have something to drink because, you're talking a lot and, sometimes it's hot in these game stores. So, having at least drinks around the table is kind of inevitable. Personally, I make sure whatever I'm drinking is a bottle that I can put a lid on. And I usually either keep it on the floor if I'm sitting down or try to set it on a table far away from where we're actually playing. I try to get it away from the cards because, you don't want to be spilling your drink and ruining somebody's, $150 Destiny deck.
That's exactly how I feel. Well, word for word. Bottled, maybe keep it on the floor. Definitely keep it away from the cards. However, not everyone drinks stuff like that. The thing that make me the most nervous are the, those giant peace tea cans.
Yep.
I've never seen one fall over, but I just look at them like it's just like the Hindenburg. I'm just like, oh my God, you're going to ruin everyone's cards if you fall over.
Yeah. And in food, I think it just depends on what it is. I mean, somebody eating jelly beans or something, not a big deal. But sure. If you're eating chicken wings or, Cheetos, just take a break, go outside, eat your chicken wings, come back in, wash your hands. Pizza. I don't,
All right, so here's how I feel. In casual, you can eat whatever you want, you just can't touch my cards if you're eating something nasty.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I say all this, but like where we play in Nashville, we usually play on weeknights. So everybody's kind of rushing there after work and stuff. And so people are eating dinner while we're playing. But the tables we have there are big enough where you can kind of like set your food to the side. And when it's not your turn, you can go over and take a few bites of Chinese food and come back.
Right.
So that works out. But yeah, definitely in like a tournament setting, I would not expect my opponent to be, sitting there scarfing down.
I think in a tournament setting, it's just completely inappropriate to be eating food in any manner while a game is going on.
Yeah, but see, even that's tough though, because some of these regionals will go on 7 or 8 hours. You got to eat something at some point in there. Hopefully, it's like during a break when you're not playing. But
that's when you have to do it. You have to do it in between rounds. I think when you're playing Destiny, you should just be playing Destiny. I don't think your opponent should be having to, listen to you like crinkle, 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 or God forbid if you chew with your mouth open, or, you get Cheetos on your fingers. Just let's just sit down and play a game of Destiny. And then afterwards, you can go eat. Drinking's different. I don't mind if my opponents take a drink outside of the fact that drinks. Let me ask you this. Have you ever seen drinks fall over on cards? Have you ever seen it?
Not in Destiny. I've seen it happen in board gaming, and it's a disaster. Horrifying to watch.
Yep, I've seen it in Magic. Fortunately, in Magic, a lot of people double sleeve, but yeah, that's still like code red, like level 5.
Yeah, I'm not someone who's like huge on sleeving. Like I sleeve the stuff I'm actively playing. Some people like sleeve their entire collection just in case of something like this. I actually had a buddy in board gaming one time who had this gigantic Dominion collection, like thousands of cards that were all in a single box. And one day he got out of the truck while it was raining, dropped the whole thing in a mud puddle. And luckily they were sleeved and he could like salvage, 80% of it.
That's rough.
So that's a case for sleeving your entire collection. But I usually only sleeve the stuff I'm playing.
Man. Well, for those of you out there, if you've ever had someone spill, or even yourself, if you spilled a drink on your cards, my heart goes out to you. That sucks. All right, I got one more topic in this category for player etiquette. How do you deal with salty/angry players?
I'm a person who, I play Destiny mainly to have fun, and confronting people is not usually what helps me have fun. So if somebody's being like rude or, is obviously upset about the game, I usually just kind of shut down and stop talking to them. Let's just get this over with and move on from each other. That's usually kind of how I approach it. I've never had anybody that was like so much of a problem that I had to confront them.
Yeah, I agree. That's basically what I do. And I'm usually pretty happy and jovial, I'll be talking with my opponent, but if they're just being like salty or angry, I just kind of I shut down, I'll interact with them in terms of, what you have to do to play the game, but nothing outside of that. And then when the match is done, I just pick up my stuff and I'll leave. That's like one of the instances where I won't extend a hand and I won't say GG. I'm just like, all right, I'm gone. You have fun being salty there in the corner.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much of that in Destiny. I've seen it in some other settings. Most of the people I've bumped into in the Destiny community have been really good about it.
We have a good community.
A few people I've beaten who are obviously kind of down about it, but nobody's gotten angry.
Sure. I had an incident. Incident is a strong word. But I had there was a player in my local meta, and he would just be super salty. And we were playing one day, and I was beating him, and then he just started. The salt fountain turned on, and I just said something. I was like, "Hey, man, you're ruining this for me." And he's, he apologized. He's like, "I'm sorry." He apologized 3 different times. He messaged me later. He's like, "I'm so sorry." And he's actually been great ever since that. I was talking about that kind of thing with one of my buddies, and they were saying that sometimes those kinds of people, even though they're being, salty or something and ruining your experience, they might not be aware of that. So I'm not saying confrontation is the best way to do it, but there is the upside that if you tell them about it, they might be able to fix it because they weren't even aware of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I've definitely had days of Destiny where I've just been getting hammered. And, like I say, I mostly play for fun, but it feels bad to lose like 6 games in a row. And I can kind of see, like, if, I were being kind of a bummer, kind of in my own little corner, I just might not be aware that everybody else is like, being brought down by my negativity.
Sure. And I think it's a little different if you're like closer friends. Like when we play, you'll salt and I'll salt and be like, that never happens. I can play this game 100 times and it'll never happen again. But it's not a big deal. What is a big deal is if you're the kind of person who does that, you have to try to not do that to people you don't know because it's awkward for them.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add for player etiquette?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about, like, when you're playing against people you know versus playing with people you don't know, and even then versus playing against new players. Because I think etiquette probably matters a lot less when you're playing with your friends. Obviously, I mean, they're not going to be as upset when you say stuff to them. Strangers, you never know, though. I mean, they might, laugh and joke along with you. They might take offense. You just never know. So I think, like, if you have somebody new walk into your store, whether they've been playing Destiny for a few days or, they're brand new to the game, I think that's probably when you need to be on your best behavior.
Yeah, you got to keep it professional when you're playing someone you don't know. Okay.
Yeah, and like when I was first starting out, my first experience was at like a store championship. That was basically the first game of Destiny I ever played. And thinking back on that, like the way everybody acted there was a huge determining factor in like whether or not I stuck around in the game. If everybody had been kind of salty and rude about everything, I doubt I would have stayed with the game. I probably would have just tried it that one time and then given up. But, because everybody was really friendly and cool and welcoming, I made a lot of rules mistakes because I didn't really know what I was doing at that point, and people, were polite about pointing them out. And I think, that really probably made the difference in whether or not I kept playing.
Right. So if you're someone who likes playing Destiny, if you enjoy this game we play, be nice to other players
Or you'll end up hurting your community.
All right, let's talk about tokens and representing the game state as a whole. You know what I mean by tokens, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's talk.
Yeah, so tokens are actually something that kind of bother me, custom tokens. I don't like when I'm in a tournament setting having to look across the table and going, okay, now what are those?
Ding, ding, ding.
I know, like, usually it's easy to tell. Like, a lot of people I've noticed will use X-Wing tokens. Like, they'll use X-Wing shield tokens instead of Destiny. I know what they are, but the fact that I have to, like, take that extra half second to think about it, I find super obnoxious.
Oh, man. I'm actually an offender when it comes to shields. I use a translucent light blue dye. And there's a reason I do that. The reason I use dice for shield is because when people arrange their dice in front of their characters, it just like it always obscures the shield tokens. But if you have your shields on a die, you can see them. You can see them past the die a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that. And, I'm not usually one to make a big deal of it because, like, there are some pretty cool custom tokens out there that, really add kind of some theme and flavor to the game. So I'm not going to tell you you can't use them.
Right.
But I find them pretty annoying.
Okay. Shields aren't the big offenders, though. It's resources and it's damage tokens. Those are the big ones. Shields are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, shields I don't mind as much. The damage tokens, though, are a huge one.
Massive.
I've seen people playing all sorts of different resource tokens, and it can be kind of hard to tell what you're looking at, especially if they do like the, okay, these are 1 and these are 5 kind of thing. And I'm having to look across and go, okay, what am I doing here?
Yeah, so on damage tokens, there are a few things that really get me here. One is, to an extent, I don't like there being more than 1s and 3s, but I can live with it. However, if it's a token, it has to be face up. I've seen people, they'll have a like a custom a token, which obviously I don't know the value of, and then it'll be face down, and then I really don't know what's going on. I hate that. The second thing is I don't like when damage all gets stacked on top of each other, because then, like, you have an idea of how much damage you've done to your opponent's character, but the axis isn't readily available, and that's annoying. And the third one is when it's obscured by dice.
Yeah, I mean, the players themselves can do a lot to mitigate that by just making sure they have their damage tokens where you can see them. But yeah, that is something that annoys me a lot about like Fantasy Flight's prize kit tokens, is that they're only one-sided.
Okay, let's talk resources now.
There's that incident in Vegas with resources. I think one of the players had resources that could be displayed as face up, meaning I have the resources, and face down, meaning I don't. And I think it caused misplays due to misinformation.
Yeah, I think if I were playing somebody that had those, I would have to ask them to just do the usual, either put them out to show you have them or take them away to show they're missing. It shouldn't be my responsibility as your opponent to keep up with how many resources you have.
I agree.
I should just be able to look and tell very easily.
Right. And you might not even want it to be something you verbalize. You know, you could be giving away that you're trying to avoid removal or something like that. Like, you want to be able to discreetly tell information. That goes for damage, too. You want to, like, if you're holding a synchronicity or something, you want to be able to see that they're too short of lethal without having to ask or something like that. Lest they, you know, get suspicious and start messing with your dice and knocking you off of potential removal that they know could be in your list.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because having to ask how many resources do you have is giving your opponent information. They know you're about to attempt something, and they're hoping you can't counter it.
Right. Okay. So if you do use custom tokens, I think that you should always have the ones that come in the starter sets on hand to switch out if your opponents ask. I've only had one opponent ask for me not to use my D6 on shields. And I told him, sure, no problem. And I used this you know, the cardboard Boba Fett helmets. Not a big deal.
Yeah, I think that should definitely be the rule. I think the last time I read anyway, Fantasy Flight's tournament rules say that you can use custom tokens as long as it's clear what they are. Although I guess that's up to the event organizer. I think the rule actually should be you can do that, but if your opponent requests you use standard tokens, you have to use standard tokens. That's just, I think, the most fair way to go about it.
Right. I think it would be nice if FFG mandated a place where damage goes, because they don't really have any rules for where damage goes. I think it should always be either you pick one left or right of the character and laid out, never stacked, always face up. I really wish there was a rule like that. Yeah, and there's a good number of things you could do with that. I mean, you could, like, the rule could be just have it cover the character art, or do, like, always stack it to the left side or directly in front of. I would never want it on the character art, because when it goes on the character art, that's when it starts getting obscured by the dice. I think it should always be to the side of the character, and consistently so you can see how much, you can look in the same spot on each character to see how much damage they have. That's what I do. I never have any issues. I basically lay it out the way that TTS does. I have, the tokens up there and then the shields on top, and I never have any problems. Yeah, that actually does bring up a larger point, though, which is just kind of general board layout. I do, having played a lot of different people, kind of wish that was a little bit more standards around that. Right. Because I noticed, like, some people are very organized when they sit down and have all their stuff in, like, neat little stacks off to the side. It's clear where their resources go, and it's clear where the damage is. Some people just kind of sit down, dump all the tokens on the middle of the player mat. The cards are just kind of arranged in no particular order. The deck is not kind of usually where you'd expect it to be. It's just a mess. And it's like, the thing that really gets me is, like, the difference in I have these resources and I don't is like 2 inches forwards or backwards. And so I'm really having to struggle to say, all right, are those resources in his pool? Or are they not? Right. I agree. I think it's a good etiquette thing to have all of your stuff kind of organized, in like a TTS fashion, so that it's just, quick and easy to tell what's going on. Right. All public information should be, easy to see, easy to comprehend. Yeah.
I should not have to ask what's happening on one of your characters.
Right. So basically what I do is I have a little container for my resources, and it's got a lid. And the primary container has, 20 something resources, and then I'll put the lid down, and my resources for the turn go in the lid. And it's very clear what resources I have and what resources I don't have. Now, not everyone has to do that, but I think that's a good example of a way to handle that.
Yeah, I do. I kind of keep all of my resources in a box off to the side, and then like set my tokens in front of my deck, take them completely away when I spend them. That kind of helps me, at least when I have to like move them around like that, to make sure I actually remove what I'm supposed to and don't end up, inadvertently cheating.
How do you feel about dice representing shields, damage, and or resource tokens?
Yeah, so I have mixed feelings about that. My biggest concern would be that as you're moving cards around the dice and as you're rolling dice around them, that they're going to get knocked and not put back right.
Right.
Whether on purpose or accidentally, probably more likely accidentally.
Yeah, you can't get into a situation where a dice knocks over and you're like, what was that? And your opponent say, I don't know. Like, that's not an okay thing to happen.
Yeah, that's a big concern. Although the benefit is it takes up less table space. It's easy to look and see what it is.
Right. I think my rule of thumb is I don't mind as long as the die can't be knocked over. And the case of resources is different because resources have when the value of resources is 0, it needs to be very obvious. So some people use for example, spin downs for health, but there's not a 0 on a spin down. So I don't think it's okay to use, or just regular dice even. Most regular dice don't have 0s on them. So in that instance, I don't think it's okay to use dice for tokens. You need to have a way to, or not tokens, resources. You need to have a way to clearly display that you're out of resources for the turn. And I think
you don't think you could just take the dice away?
What's that?
You don't think when you can get down to 0, you just take the die away?
No. Because... So what happens there is you have 2 different board states. You have a board state with a die and you have a board state without a die. Whereas what I want is I want the board state to always have the die there. Because I don't want something to be like, I'm tired, it's a long day, and I'm just like, hey, where'd his resource die goes? Like I don't think that should be that should be a thing. I think I should just be able to look over where the resource die should be and say, oh, it's a 0. Not like, oh man, I forgot this opponent puts the resource die over there. Shoot, he had 2 resources. I just got blown out. No go.
Well, and this all goes back to, it's kind of a pain in a tournament setting when everybody's doing something different. Toward the end of it, you really kind of start to get brain burn and don't want to think about, all right, what does that die represent?
Sure.
So again, that's my biggest concern is A, that it gets knocked around, and B, that it's going to be hard to tell what's happening.
Okay. Well, so while we're talking about dice, actually, what do you think about the touching of other players' dice?
My vote would be never touch your opponent's die. Just rely on them to do that. You can point at them. I actually do touch them in the sense that, like, if I'm playing a removal card, I might take the card and reach across the table and, like, tap the die I'm removing, just, like, so it's clear.
Oh, sure. Pointing's fine.
Remove the 2 damage, and there's like multiple 2 damage dice. I might reach across and like tap the die I'm talking about. But yeah, I would never like pick up somebody else's die.
Do you ever pick up your opponent's die if they forget to remove it from the pool after resolving for it? Do you ever remove it for them?
No, I would just say, hey, you forgot to take that out.
I'll be honest. I usually remove it for them, and I view it as sort of a helpful kind of thing. I don't think it's like a rude or like, ooh, I'm, messing with your stuff. I'm just like, here you go, man. You forgot.
Yeah, it's probably not something I would personally be offended by if somebody did that. But it's kind of again, I come from the board game community. It's kind of understood board gaming etiquette that you don't touch other people's pieces.
Right.
It kind of comes across as like condescending, I think. Some people care, some people don't, but so like generally I just try not to touch other people's stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Generally I don't. For some reason when it comes to that, I see it as more rude to be like, hey, you forgot to remove that, rather than here you go. But that's just a personal thing. That could be something I'm wrong about. I've never had anyone complain, but then again, I wouldn't know. Maybe that's something I shouldn't do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like most people, even if they were offended, wouldn't say anything.
Right.
But I don't know which one of us is right. You know, it might come across as more rude for me to be like, hey, take that out. Like I'm accusing them of something rather than just being like, oh, here you go.
Sure. Have you ever had, like someone plays an overconfidence and they hand you the dice to reroll?
Like they're playing it on their...
No. Like you play it on, all right, well, I'll do two scenarios. One's actually a lot more common. So one is you're like overconfidence and you point at two of their die. Have you ever had an opponent like give you those two die?
Like pick up two of my dice and hand them to me?
Or pick up two of their dice and hand them to you. Same for Doubt,
no.
actually. Okay, I've had that happen before. It's
the
weird.
way we have always played is like whoever's dice are being re-rolled, they re-roll their own dice.
Right. I don't think it matters at all. I was just kind of wondering if you've ever had that. That happens with Doubt too sometimes. The more common one I've seen is when you do the rare overconfidence, my die, your die. A lot of the time, my opponent will actually give me their die to reroll along with mine.
I think I have seen that one time early on in gaming. Somebody would hand me both dice to reroll, but generally it's always been whoever's dice are being re-rolled. Everybody just re-rolls their own.
Okay, yeah, that's reasonable. There's no real importance to, if someone hands you their dice to reroll. I was just wondering if that's something you've seen, because it is rare and it's interesting. Let's talk about time management. And by time management, I mean, how do you address players that are, or at least you feel are playing slowly?
I've only hit this once, and I didn't do anything about it at the time. I just kind of sat there and took it. And it ended up working out because I did actually end up winning that, but it was coming very close and I was getting pretty uncomfortable. I wish I had said something about it. Because if I had lost that due to time, that would have just been infuriating.
Most people are, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but most people are pretty sheepish when it comes to asking their opponents to speed up. I played control decks throughout my Magic career, so I'm used to long games, and as a product of that, I'm also used to asking my opponents who are playing slowly to speed up. So I kind of have a tier system I'll go through. At first, well, let me lay out just the groundwork of what I think acceptable time management is. So I think for the most part, you should be resolving your actions pretty quickly. And if you're resolving most of your actions pretty quickly, if you tank for a bit, I'm not going to say anything. You can take 30 seconds or something on a turn. And if you've been going pretty quickly, I'm not going to say anything. I'll just give you your moment. However, if it's a repeated thing where an opponent keeps doing stuff, I have like a tier system of like upgrades, if you will. Like the first thing I'll start doing is I'll ask them, what are you doing? Then the second thing will be like something like, we're going to need to pick up the pace of the game if we don't want to go to time. And then like the third final tier is, I'm going to need you to start playing faster. And I usually never get to that third tier because that's the tier when you start to become rude, if you will, or at least it can come across as rude. It usually stops in between 1 and 2, but I have gone to the third one and I will do it. Just like, I don't want to be rude, but as a competitor, it's important for my opponent to, be a good opponent and play in a prudent manner.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You don't want to, rush somebody when they're trying to think. But Destiny should be a pretty snappy game. I mean, it's like, especially when the round opens, you've only got a couple of things you can realistically do. But then if you're playing like OTK and you're trying to figure out like, what to resolve and what to reroll, that can take a good bit of thought. And you don't want to, hold your opponent to like 5 seconds to think about how to resolve their dice. But, for the most part, Destiny should be a pretty snappy game.
The worst one is when, have you ever met anyone who will take like 10 seconds to roll?
No.
Yeah, that happens. That's always terrible when that happens.
That's an interesting thing to interject there is like the actual mechanics for how you roll. I mean, some people just like pick up the die and then like toss them. Some people pick them up and like shake them in their hands. I've never been convinced that shaking it in your hand is actually really doing anything. What are your thoughts?
I've never thought about that. Let's simulate that. I actually have some dice on my table because I'm a slob. Let's see what we got here. We got some mauls. We got a thermal detonator. We have Ketsu. All right, let's not talk about what I need these for. So yeah, I'm just rolling them in my hand. Their faces are changing. Let's see what happens when I roll. So when I roll, I like gently toss them out of my hand. I feel it's fairly random, my method.
Interesting. I'm more in the camp of I just pick them up and then throw them.
Be more specific. You just bam.
I just kind of grab them. I might shake them like a little bit, but then I just toss them. I'm not one of the people who especially if I'm rolling like 5 dice. Some people will like cup them in both hands, shake them around for like 5 seconds.
Yeah, that doesn't do anything. Just a little bit of shaking should randomize it.
Yeah. I've always thought if you're holding like 6 dice in your hands, you're really just kind of rattling them against each other. You're not actually randomizing that much, but I could be wrong.
How do you control where they go because it sounds like you throw them a lot more violently. Like, all right, when I roll and I move them from my hand, the farthest one went maybe 6 inches away from my hand.
Yeah, I do have them get away from me sometimes. But the way it works in like miniatures games is you kind of hold your hand like almost under the table a little bit. You hold it like back next to you and then kind of toss the die up so that it lands, in front of you.
Jeez.
You don't throw it forward. You just kind of toss it up.
That's not how I roll at all. Maybe there should be some outlines on. Maybe I don't know. Do you think there should be outlines on what proper rolling is? Do you think that's something that should be in the rule books?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that gets a little bit nitpicky. It also kind of depends on how the board state is. Like if I have a bunch of tokens where I would usually throw my dice, I might change approach and like roll them sideways across the table or something. So it kind of depends on what's happening. But my usual approach is just to kind of like spin them and toss them up so that they don't go far.
Yeah, rolling's a very interesting beast. I actually think that I don't think you should go into too much detail because we're really just getting babied if they go into too much detail. But I think there should be some basic outlines on what constitutes rolling. Like people who put dice in their hand, and if they just turn their hand over and they drop their die, that's not rolling. That's just dropping dice. I don't think that's random enough. That's
super awkward because like I've done that a couple of times. Just I've been lazy and like I thought the die would roll further than it did, but it just kind of flopped out of my hand. And then it's like, well, do I re-roll this? Do I not re-roll this? It's never a good thing to be asking your opponent whether or not you want them to re-roll.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think for 99% of people, they know exactly how to roll. It'll be sufficiently randomized, and it won't be a problem. So hopefully that's not something we need in the rules, but I don't know. You never know. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about our final aspect of gaming etiquette. How do you handle allowing players to have takebacks?
So this is my adage, which I took from the board game community. And this may be a little bit more lenient than most people are. But my thought is I will allow takebacks as long as no new information has come to light since they did whatever they did. So, for example, if they have like a resource and a focus showing and they say, all right, I'll take a resource. No, wait, I'm actually going to put that resource back and focus. If that's the whole transaction and nothing else changed in there, I'm okay with that because no new information got brought to light. But if they're like, can you expound a little what you mean by new information? Sure. So if they, for instance, say, all right, I'm going to take a resource. And then I say, okay, I'm going to activate this character. And then they say, no, wait, I don't want to do the resource. I want to use the focus. Well, in that time in there, they learned that I'm about to activate this character. So Ooh. That's new information that came to light in the period they're trying to take back. Small segue right here. When it comes to etiquette, I didn't think about this. When you're playing someone, give them a few seconds after they resolve. When they do something, don't immediately do something. It's just rude, and you can get into really messy board states where judges need to be called because they hadn't finished doing something. That's just a side note. Make sure you give your opponents, a second or two after an action, so you don't get into an awkward spot. Sorry, keep going though. Yeah, that's a good point. But say even pretending I did that, they take an action. I kind of start to take an action, and they go, oh, no, wait, I want to take that back. At the point that they've learned something about me, I'm not okay with them taking it back. But as long as they kind of take it back before they learn any new information, Like no cards are drawn, no dice are rolled. As long as nothing has changed, I'm usually okay with them taking it back.
So my approach, I think that's a very lenient approach, and I think that's fine. Everyone to their own. My approach is more rigid. I basically, as a rule, don't allow takebacks. There are situations where it's okay. The primary one is if you're doing something, if you say, I'm going to do this, wait, I'm going to do this instead. If you say it fluidly, like as in, if it were written as a sentence, there'd be a comma there instead of a period, that's fine. But if there's any kind of delay in between there, a second or so, for me, that's the action you've decided, and you can't take that back.
Interesting. So is there any sort of say I'm going to resolve melee damage, and I reach for my melee dice and kind of pause a second, and then I say, no. And without ever taking my melee dice out, I say, no, I'm going to do range damage and do range.
So that's a separate thing, and I'm also okay with this. You have to complete your action for me to hold you to it. So if you say, I'm going to do this, and you don't do it, that's fine. I'm okay with that. You can say you're going to do whatever you want. I'm not going to hold you to anything but what you actually do.
What about triggered events? So if one of my cards, so say Night Sister Coven was supposed to trigger, one of your characters rolls a blank, we move on 2 or 3 seconds later, and I realize, oh, this should have activated. What are your thoughts there?
Missed triggers?
What's the point at which you can no longer activate that trigger?
So I think that missed triggers are optional in Destiny. I don't think they're mandatory. I'd have to double check on that. If it's an optional trigger and you miss it, if when you miss your trigger, if your opponent's or the next action is resolved, you can no longer go back to that trigger in my eyes. So if you do something, so let's say the Night Sister trigger occurs, and then I roll out a dice, I play a card, I do anything like that, and then you notice, it's too late. We're already past where you should have done that. If they do it, and it's before I do anything and they point it out, 10 seconds could have passed, you're fine. I haven't done anything else. It's still your turn, as it were. So for me, you need to do it on your turn or the opportunity is gone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually had this come up in one of my regionals. Pretty much cost me the game. It was late in the tournament, and I was super burned out. I was playing 5-die and killed one of my opponent's characters and forgot to immediately reactivate Bala. So I killed his character, and it was his turn. He hadn't done anything yet, but I had clearly passed the turnover to him, and I said, "Oh, I forgot to reactivate Bala," and he was like, "Well, that's too bad."
Yeah, let's see Bala real quick. Yeah, it's
basically as soon as one of your opponent's characters dies, his ability triggers and he reactivates.
Right. After an opponent's character is defeated, you may ready this character. Yeah, that really sucks. If it says may and you don't, sorry, buddy. That's how I see it. I fully understand that that's not how everyone looks at it. I just have a more rigid approach to tournament play.
Yeah, and I understood. I wasn't upset about it. If it were me, since I hadn't done anything yet, I'd probably let them do it just because I'm a pushover. What was lame, though, is that later in that same match, it was my turn, and he realized that I should have taken a shield on this Shoto during my turn, and started to take the Shoto, and I was like, no. If I can't reactivate Bala, you can't take the Shoto shield.
Yeah, Shoto's are the big one. I think that's one of the most missed triggers. I played against someone, and it was 3 full actions after the Shoto, and he's like, "Oh, I forgot a shield." And I was like, "Hold on, man. We're way past that Shoto trigger. That was a minute ago."
Yeah, the Shoto and the Obi-Wan shield, I constantly forget.
Yep, those will do it. The on activation triggers are easy to miss unless you get a lot of reps. I play so much Rayla that I basically never miss the Shoto triggers anymore.
Yeah, missing the Bala trigger felt really bad because that's basically that deck's entire gimmick.
Would you have won if you had untapped?
It was really close. I had a really good shot at winning that if I had remembered to do that. But not doing it definitely cost me the game.
All right. Is there anything you want to add for gaming etiquette or player etiquette, for that matter?
I think we pretty much covered it.
Okay. All right. I've got 3 questions for you. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. What are your feelings on the new Solo movie that's about to come out?
I am cautiously optimistic. I've actually been in the camp of people that like most of the new movies. But I think taking on Han Solo is a big risk. I think it's going to be really hard to do that character justice. And I think a lot of people are going to hate it no matter how it turns out.
Okay. The second question will be, what's your least favorite Destiny card?
Oh, man. My least favorite Destiny card is probably Prized Possession.
Ooh.
Because swiping somebody's die... no, I'm going to take that back. My least favorite is Second Chance.
There we go.
I hate having to choose through Second Chance. I play mostly villain, and when I see Second Chance plop down, even if I'm winning, I'm just like, you know what? I don't even want to finish this match. I hate Second Chance.
All right, here's the third question. Any decks you're feeling good about right now? Anything you're enjoying playing?
Yeah, the only thing I seem to be able to win with lately is Hero Vehicle. I run the Ezra, Ayla, Rose version, and that seems pretty strong. That's kind of what I've been enjoying lately. Although I lose pretty much consistently to Rayla, which seems to be the hotness right now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rayla, as you probably know. All right, Aaron, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Versus. My name is Lake, and today we will be speculating about upcoming Holocron balance changes. Now before we dive into this, it's been just under a week since I've gotten back from Worlds, and I'd like to give a special shout out to anyone I met or hung out with during the entirety of that event. It was great fun. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Knights of Ren podcast and the Your Destiny podcast, along with their European test group, which I spent the majority of my week with. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. A lot of players have been talking about the likelihood of a new holocron coming out in the near future with balance changes. So let's just break down why you would need balance changes. By my count, there are 3 reasons. 1, power level. 2, fun factor. 3, forcing of variety and meta change. All right, starting from the top with number 1, power level. This is an easy concept for everyone to understand. If a card's too strong, it usually needs to be nerfed. So the second reason, fun factor, might seem related to power level, but it is different. Obviously, you have scenarios where the power level of a card is high enough so that it is ruining the fun of others. However, it is very possible to have a card that's not particularly strong, however, is popular or well-liked enough that it's still doing enough damage to the player base to the point where it needs to be addressed. And the third reason, forcing a variety or forcing a meta change is not something that usually comes into play. However, given the rate at which FFG is releasing their products, we might come into a scenario where just to mix up the game enough and breathe some life into it, they might have to tweak the meta a little so that it'll feel like a new game without them having to actually release a new product. Although seriously, FFG, we really need new stuff. At this point, I think there are actually 3 different ways where you could see a holocron implement balance changes into the game, and that would be card erratas, which we're all familiar with, and then they could also implement 2 new different ways to control the card pool, which would be a restriction list. And what a restriction list means is you cannot play a full playset of cards. So in Destiny, that would mean where the max is 2, now you can only play 1 of a card. Or they could also just have an outright ban list where you're allowed to play 0. So let's break down what these 3 different balance methods could entail. So number 1, errata. We're all familiar with errata. That being said, most people don't really like errata because you get in a situation where you have a card and what's printed on the card isn't actually what it does, which is just a feel-bad experience for the players, and it's even worse for new players who, come out and they play a card and then they're in a situation where someone has to tell them that, look, I know that it's a trap says that, but actually it does almost none of these things.
Nobody really likes that. That being said, erratas are probably the most elegant way of fixing a card. You can still allow it to be in the pool in full numbers. You know, you just kind of tweak it a little more towards what it was designed to be. For restrictions are sort of a middle ground between an outright banning and an errata, where you admit that the card is extremely powerful, but you still like its effect. So what you do is you just limit it to 1 to allow its presence to be in games, but not dominate them. And the third method is obvious, a banned list, cards on the list. You just cut ties with them, you say, you know what, we've had enough of this card, and you just remove it from the pool. So next I'm going to make a list of all the offenders I've heard or have thought about for an upcoming holocron change, and I'm going to apply each of these 3 balance methods to them. Now, just so you know, I don't necessarily agree with everything I've heard. However, for the sake of completion, I'm going to list all of them. So we have Second Chance, Hyperspace Jump, Force Illusion, Force Speed, Rally Aid, Shotos, Ancient Lightsaber, Feel Your Anger, Easy Pickings, Force Misdirection, Never Tell Me the Odds, Close Quarter Assault, Caution, and for characters we have Sabine, Ayla, Yoda, Ezra, and Kylo. Alright, we're going to start off with the big one, Second Chance. This has to be one of the most hated cards in the game. Nobody likes playing against this card. I'm sure many people don't even like playing this card. So Second Chance is a card from really a different time in Destiny. It was from the very first set when the dichotomy between heroes and villains just had a different dynamic. Heroes were a much more passive and defensive oriented faction, and villains were a very aggressive one that was just trying to be the beatdown. And Second Chance was a card that really helped facilitate heroes in their role of just being defensively oriented and being able to withstand the onslaught of villains. However, this is not a world we live in anymore. Heroes are just as capable as villains are at dishing out damage. You could easily argue that they're just as tanky as they were before, if not more so, thanks to changes like the Vibro Knife nerf. So the power level of Second Chance is just woefully out of place right now. So let's apply the 3 different changes we could do to it. So, would you errata this card? You could. I don't know how much room you actually have to errata this card. You could make it cost 4, which honestly is almost just as bad as banning it. It's already restricted to yellow characters only. I don't know if you could change its text to say anything. So, I don't know. I don't think it can be errated. I think you'd have to move it to one of the 2 other options. You could restrict it, but I don't really feel restricting is the way to go with a card like Second Chance. While it is less likely that your opponent will find his Second Chance when there's just 1 in the deck, you're still going to have these really terrible experiences when you lose to your opponent, where him finding the 1 second chance was all he needed, and it never even really mattered that there could have been a second one in the deck. So I really don't think that just having 1 second chance per deck is going to be the fix for something like this. So obviously, my suggestion would be to just straight put it on the ban list. I think everyone would be happy if it was on the ban list. I think it's from a time where it's no longer needed. You just get rid of it, and you just move forward. The game will be healthier for it. Next up, we have Hyperspace Jump. Now, I personally don't have any problems with Hyperspace Jump. I actually think it serves a useful purpose in the metagame where it helps you counter some strategies like vehicles, maybe some of the slower mill decks, some of the super wide character lists. It doesn't cost 2. It obviously costs 3, so it's somewhat easy to predict and play around. Let's say that FFG does find it's a problem. What would you do to it? Would you errata it? You could make it cost 4, or you could do something where it doesn't jump immediately. It gives your opponent an action or 2, much like Retreat does. Maybe you just give it a slight touch. Maybe you change the text from "you may switch the battlefield with the battlefield that is not being used" to something like "give control of the battlefield to your opponent if he doesn't already have it." That way, after you jump, your opponent has initiative, because probably one of the worst things about Hyperspace Jump is not only are you jumping and voiding all your opponent's turns, but usually the decks that play Hyperspace are going to be going first again, and that's just a real kick when you're down. Could you ban this card? You could. I don't think you should, though. I think it serves a good role in the meta. And could you restrict it? Yeah, you could restrict it. You could make it just 1. I don't think it would be too worse for wear. But like I said, I think the card is doing good work. Maybe if you're going to touch it at all, maybe you just make it so that your opponent is always allowed to go first after you jump. That's just my opinion, though. Moving on, we have Force Illusion. Now, I like Force Illusion, but it's probably just a little too strong. Just for one resource, you get a card that more or less removes anywhere from 1 die to, I would say, about 3 on average. Usually saves you 3+ hit points, and most importantly, unlike most removal spells, even something like Honor Guard, which is a permanent type removal card, where it just stays on the battlefield, Force Illusion is purely passive. It's just fire and forget. Sure, of course, it's subject to unblockable damage. However, one could argue that the whole reason that unblockable damage is considered to be good right now is because of Force Illusion, which really isn't a good argument for a card being healthy. So, how would you fix this card? Errata, ban, restriction? So, I don't know what you would do to errata it. A lot of people are going to say it should be blue only. Here's the reality about that. Just look at the World's Finals. It's just all blue. Right now, we're in a situation where blue cards, blue characters, blue anything, it's just the best. So, sure, you could have it where Force Illusion can't go on Maz or, I don't know, Sabine or Rose or whoever, but the reality of the matter is most of the strongest characters in the game are already blue, and that's really not going to do that much to fix the card. So my suggestion would be, if you need to fix it, that you could ban it, just remove it completely, or you could restrict it to just a 1-of. I think if you restricted it so that there's only 1 in the deck, the card becomes a lot more palatable. Could you ban this card? Sure, of course. If you feel that blue's too strong, if you feel that Force Illusion's too strong, if you feel like it's creating an unhealthy metagame, if you feel like it's pushing the tankiness of blue decks too far, if you feel like it's just too aggravating for people to have to play against in general, sure, get rid of it. It's not going to cripple blue, and the game might be better off for it. Alright, let's talk Force Speed. Now, Force Speed is an incredibly powerful card, especially for how much it costs. So for the low price of 0 resources, you have a card with 3 specials on it, which is already ridiculous, a focus, and a shield, so the card doesn't even have a bad side outside of its blank. Now, not a lot of people have really talked about this being a card that needs to be fixed, and I'm not exactly sure why. The power level of Force Speed is just completely ridiculous compared to cards that other factions play. The only thing I can think of that's close to this in terms of cheapness and power level is Easy Pickings, which, by the way, we will be talking about later. So what would you do to fix this card? Errata-wise, you could make it cost 1 more. You could restrict it. I don't think that's the right way to move with a card like this, because generally the card isn't dangerous in multiples. I would consider it to be at its best when you just have 1. And when you restrict a card and you only have 1 left in a list, you have this dichotomy where when you don't draw it, it feels really bad, and when you do draw it, it feels really, really good. And of course, the opposite is going to be true for your opponent. If they never see you have it, it's great for them. If they see you draw your 1-of, it's just terrible. It's like the, there wasn't even a balance to it. Could you ban this card? Yeah, you probably could. I don't think blue needs any more help right now. All right, let's move on to Rally Aid. Now, Rally Aid is a card that not too many people have mentioned need a nerf, and maybe it doesn't. Although, for future design space restrictions, it might get toned down a little bit. I'm not sure, but let's just see what would happen. So if you errated it, maybe you could have something where it could only allow you to play supports, and if a non-support card is revealed, then it has no effect. You could increase its point cost by 1. Is this a card you could restrict? Yeah, maybe. 2's pretty oppressive, but I feel like if you just get 1 that gets the job done, and sure, if you restrict it, you're only half as likely to see it. I don't really know if restriction's the way to go here. I also don't know if this is a type of card you need to ban, but To ban a card like this, I would really need to know what kind of vehicles or supports or what have you will be coming out in the future, and I just don't have that kind of knowledge. So maybe it needs changes, maybe it doesn't. I would lean overall towards it doesn't, but I don't know. This is really a type of card where what the future entails will really decide its fate. Okay, next up is Shoto. Now, Shoto is a fine card when there's one of them. When there's two of them, the card's ridiculous. So this is a really easy candidate for an errata or a restriction, but not a ban if FFG feels like this is the kind of card that needs to be changed. The errata would include something like saying that Shotos can't trigger off each other, or they can't trigger twice, or something to that effect, so that you don't get two shields when you roll in, because that really gets out of hand very quickly. If you get two Shotas on a character, it just becomes an insane struggle for your opponent if he's trying to fight fair. Restriction, this is a good candidate for restrictions. If you just have one, they obviously can't trigger off each other, and there's no reason really to ban this card. It's not overtly powerful in singles. It's really doubles where it becomes too powerful. Now, I will say that overall, Shoto's not hugely broken, even when in doubles. However, just the strength of blue right now really pushes it over the edge. And when you start getting two shields a turn, you have characters like Rey just pinging everywhere. If Obi-Wan gets two of them, he gets potentially 3 health a turn. Suddenly, Kylo or Boba Fett become way too tanky for how much damage they do. So, maybe Shoto gets touched up. It probably doesn't. But I think that the game would be healthier if, at minimum, they didn't trigger off each other. Or they didn't stack up twice. Okay, so after that, there's Ancient Lightsaber, an extremely pushed card for 2 reasons. One, it's got the black 1, blue +3, and for an upgrade that only costs 2, it's pretty pushed, especially that +3. And I'm looking at you, Boba Fett. You know exactly what that +3 is doing. You also have its secondary useful feature, which is its action, where you can put it on the bottom of your deck and you can heal for 2. Now, I don't think that this card is particularly broken outside of it committing the cardinal sin of being a blue card in a metagame where blue is just too powerful. I don't really know what the fix to this would be. You could errata it. I don't know what the errata would be. Most of the strength of the card is actually tied up in that +3. The healing is good, so like an errata would look something like it only heals 1, but honestly, I think if it only healed for 1, it really wouldn't diminish the amount of play it sees. I think it would still see just as much play and almost really be about as good. Sure, it heals you for 1 less, but it's still going to be good against mill in those situations where you can actually successfully stall them out a turn. And it's still capable of hitting you like a truck. Would you restrict this card? No, it's really not on that level where, you need to tone down 2 of them. However, I will admit that looping Ancients at the end of a game is pretty obnoxious. That being said, not too big of a deal. Does it need to be banned? Absolutely not. So, I don't know. Ancient Lightsaber's in a tricky spot. Sure, it's a little too good, but maybe at the end of the day, being a little too good and not being way too good is enough for it to escape any kind of errata. So for my next 3, it'll be the triumvirate of what I call the feel bad removals. We'll start with Feel Your Anger. Now, Feel Your Anger isn't necessarily too powerful. It's more in that category I talked about earlier where being hit by it just feels really bad. The real problem with Feel Your Anger is it hits you over the one thing you just can't control in Destiny, which is how you roll out. If you roll out blanks and you get all your dice removed, or just enough of your dice removed, it feels terrible. Now here's the trick. Blue villain, or just really if you think about it, villains overall, they're not in a good spot compared to their hero equivalents. So while I don't like the card Feel Your Anger, I don't think you can remove it, because if you remove Feel Your Anger or you nerf it or whatever, I feel like you really just do more damage to villains than they can handle right now. The only way you could change it is if the Holocron update waited until the next set is released, and still in that case, you're going to have something to replace what it was doing. And I don't think that's going to happen. Now, just for completion's sake, I'll talk about what it would look like if the card was to be balanced. So errata-wise, I think you could maybe put a cap on how many dice it could remove, maybe limit it to 3 or something. But honestly, having 3 dice removed for 1 is huge. If you lower it to 2, though, I don't think it's good enough. Could you restrict it? Sure, maybe. I think the pill's a lot easier to swallow if, there's only one Feel Your Anger. Once you see it, you're good to go. And then for a ban, no, not really. Unless FFG just really hates the play experience it creates. And I don't think it's on that level. I think it just feels bad. I don't think, it's driving away players. So next up is Easy Pickings. Now, Easy Pickings is a very good card in a very good alignment. So Heroes is already in a really strong spot, and it doesn't help that they have what is the best removal spell in the game, in my opinion, in Easy Pickings. So if you were to errata Easy Pickings, which I think is the best route, I've heard people say that they would like to see it not be able to remove modifiers alongside black die sides. That's not really the approach I would take. I would push it more towards it cannot remove damage, so it can only, remove shields, resources, disrupt, focus, what have you, but leave damage alone. I think that gives aggressive decks a lot more play, and it'll probably reduce the amount of Easy Pickings played to 1. Maybe 2 will still be run. It's still a very good card. It can still hit blanks, but I think it just tones down the power level. So could you restrict it? Sure. Much like Feel Your Anger, I think that card would be a lot more tolerable if you knew that there was only going to be 1 in the enemy deck. There's a good chance that that's a great route to take if FFG does decide to create a restricted list. Would you ban the card? Yes, you could ban it. Would FFG ban a card that they just created? Probably not. Now, the third feel bad card is Force Misdirection. Now, I don't think Force Misdirection is necessarily too powerful. There's a lot of play that goes into a card like that. You need to have tempo, you need to roll out, you need to have the right die showing, you need them to have the right die showing. That being said, that card can create ridiculous blowout situations that just make your stomach twist. And also, Cardinal Sin, blue card. So what would an errata look like? I don't really know. You could have a situation where it could only remove 3 of a dice, which is still painful, but I've had 4 to 5 melee removed. Rayla mirrors. It feels terrible. Usually the end of the game right there when that happens, unless you can do it back to them. Could up its cost 2, which I think is probably a death blow. There's not really enough tuning in a game like Destiny to move a card's cost 1 resource up from 1 to 2. The difference just becomes exponential rather than, additive. Could you restrict a card like that? Yeah, you could. I think all of the 3 feel bad removal cards I mentioned would do well at being 1-ofs, knowing that they can really only crush you once. Could you ban a card like Force Misdirection? Probably not. I don't think it's that big of an offender. And honestly, I don't think the card will get hit, but it could. You never know. So next we have Never Tell Me the Odds. Now, a lot of people don't like Never Tell Me the Odds, but I don't think the problem is Never Tell Me the Odds. I think the problem is Sabine Wren, and we'll get to Sabine later. So let's say they did change it, though. What would it look like? So errata-wise, you could have more stringent spot requirements. As of right now, it just says choose one of your yellow characters, turn any number of its character and upgrade dice to the sides of your choice. You could make that say something like choose one of your yellow characters, turn any number of its yellow character dice and upgrade cards to the sides of your choice. And so what that would do is that would turn off cards like Holdout Blaster and Hidden Blaster from making you want to go punch something. You could up its cost by 1. I think that's also going to be a death sentence for it. And if you're going to kill a card like that, you should just ban it outright. Could you restrict a card like Never Tell Me the Odds? You could, but honestly, 1's usually enough to put a game out of reach for you. Could you ban a card like Never Tell Me the Odds? You could. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is Sabine rolling out and not having to worry about interaction. But you could, because people really just don't like that card. Which honestly is enough reason to get it removed. Next up is Close Quarters Assault, aka CQA. And now, in my opinion, and most high-level players' opinions that I've talked to, CQA is the best card in the game right now. It costs 0, it's gray, it's neutral, and it can make someone discard their entire hand. It's ridiculous. The power level of that card is absurd, and I've not heard nearly enough people talking about its power level. So what would an errata look like for a card like that? You can at least make it cost 1. You could also do something creative like Make it so that your opponent has to have a melee showing, so the card's just not always on. It might be a little bit more thematic in a melee versus melee kind of situation with close quarters assault. You could limit the amount of cards it can discard. You could up it to 2. Honestly, discarding an obscene amount of cards for 2, it's really not that bad. Now, what about restriction? Could you restrict a card like this? You could, but honestly, 1 strong CQA really puts a player in the hole. Could you ban this card? Yes, absolutely. I think banning would be a fine choice for a card like this. I mean, just look at the Finals of Worlds. They were both CQA decks. The card is obscenely powerful. Now, the last card up that I think might get touched would be Caution. Now, a lot of you might be surprised at me bringing up Caution, but in reality, the card's pretty strong, especially in very wide character lists. Being able to get 3 shields for 0 resources and what is most likely a blank or otherwise a useless die is very strong. Do I think it's a problem? Not really. Would FFG consider it to be a part of a package to reduce the overall power level of Hero and Blue? Maybe. So what would an errata look like? Well, obviously you could up its cost to 1. You could reduce the amount of shields it gives. You could have it so that it could only remove a blue character's die, which I think would be thematic if nothing else. Could you restrict a card like this? You could, but I'll be honest with you guys, I've seen a lot of lists that only run 1 anyways, and they're happy about it. Could you ban a card like this? You could. I don't think it's problematic enough to warrant a ban, but I suppose it's a reality. But like I said earlier, for a card like this to be fixed, you really are only going to see it get in the hologram in a situation where there's just a lot of small changes working to an overall nerf of the meta we have right now. And I don't really see that being a viable outcome. I think it's much more likely that FFG will look at the cards that are serious offenders and really tone them down or hammer them back and let the more minor offenders just kind of scoot by. Alright, let's talk characters. So, just a reminder, we have Sabine, Ayla, Yoda, Ezra, and Kylo up for talking points. Let's start with Sabine. I think it's extremely likely that we see something happening to Sabine. I think at this point, people are just tired of Sabine's shenanigans. Whether or not you believe that Sabine is a character that just does Sabine things, or you think that Sabine is a character that actually does require some skill to successfully pilot, I think people are just tired of seeing her roll in, have damage that can't be interacted with, and then have really the outcome of the game decided by what your opponent rolls more so than your interactions with them. And that's a reality, no matter how you look at Sabine as a character. And in addition to that, I should add that Sabine's going to be around for, 9 months? A year maybe? Every time they print an ambush weapon, she is going to get stronger. So I think it's extremely likely that we see some sort of change to her. Can we expect an errata? At minimum, I would expect it. Now, obviously, characters can't be restricted. Well, I suppose they could be. You could be only allowed to run 1 die. I really don't see that ever happening. And you could have characters banned, but I also don't think that's something likely. I think if FFG actually wanted to ban a card, what they would do is they would just completely neuter a card to the point where you can play it casually, but you're never going to look at a player and say, no, you cannot play that character. So, errata. What would you do to Sabine? So the most obvious thing is you could up her by a point. That would cut her connection to be played with an elite Ezra. That would cut her connection to be able to be played with single die Yoda. You could also have FFG do something like increase her point cost by 3, which obviously takes her completely out of competitive play, which would be FFG's way of soft banning a character. Like, if you're a casual player and you really like Sabine, sure, go for it. You can build your Sabine deck, but Sabine's not going to be wreaking havoc in tournaments. Now, from my perspective, there are also 3 other things you could do independent or in addition to having a point nerf with her. And those would be, number 1, you could have it so that she can't receive the ambush of weapons if they're pulled from your discard pile. Number 2, she can't overwrite with cards pulled out of her discard pile. Or 3, you could just have an overall gameplay fix where ambush weapons, or ambush cards in general, I suppose,
cards like Fangfighter have ambush, and so do some events, can only receive their ambush if they're actually played from hand. So anything coming from an effect or a discard pile will not grant ambush any longer. And I think that's perhaps a more elegant way to fix Sabine's ambush cheating than just saying that you can't overwrite or something like that. Now, like I said, restriction, not really a discussion. Ban, no, if you want to ban her, you just move her to 23. So up next, Ayla. Ayla's too cheap. Ayla could cost 3 points more and she wouldn't be great, but she wouldn't be the worst character in the game. Now, I'm not saying we should up her by 3. That's way too harsh. I think at minimum you should up her by 1, and I wouldn't be surprised if you moved her up to 2. I think 1's the most elegant, but given the situation that Blue Hero is in right now, if Ayla got moved up 2 points, wouldn't shock me. Restriction, obviously no. Would you ban her? Also a no. Alright, what about the other blue support that's wreaking havoc everywhere? Yoda? So let's talk Yoda. Yoda has the most ridiculous die that has ever been printed in this game. Not only does it have no blanks, but the sides are just great. The discard is great. The only thing that's bad is his disrupt, and honestly, who cares? The rest of it's so good. He has a double focus. His special is ridiculous. His special does two effects at any time. And they're not bad effects. Like, these are some of the most powerful things you can do in the game. You can change die sides, you can get resources, you can get shields, you can even mill if you want to do that. Card's ridiculous. I don't personally have a problem with Yoda, but a lot of people do. And Yoda might actually be in that category where I was talking about earlier, where a card isn't necessarily too powerful, but is in a situation where he's creating a negative play experience for other players, especially through special chaining. However, just the overall perceived power level of the card might be too high. Now, the fix for Yoda would be really clean and simple. You just up it by a point. You don't ban it, and although it would be interesting for thematic reasons to see Yoda become a restricted character where you can only run it as a pure support with 1 dice, which admittedly does fix a problem that he does have power level wise, which is his ability to chain into himself if he hits just one of his specials. I really just don't see FFG ever making any restriction type balance changes to characters. And so up next, we have a card that I haven't really heard too many people talking about, but I could see it based on his prevalence, especially after Worlds, is Ezra Bridger. Now, Ezra isn't really too powerful, and he doesn't really create feel bad moments for your opponent. However, for his point cost, I think he might be just a little too good, and it really wouldn't surprise me to see him get a point increase. Obviously no restriction, and definitely no ban. He's not broken, he's just suspicious in how many top lists he's in. Finally, you have Kylo. Now, I definitely don't think Kylo's a problem, but I do know he can create negative play experiences, especially for new players that don't have fully fleshed out collections that are forced to run monocolor decks. And Kylo can really ruin those players' days. However, I think it's really incumbent upon playgroups to decide that, hey, I've only got this monocolor deck, can you not run Kylo against me? And if you can create this social contract where Kylo isn't played in casual groups or against these new players that can't really handle his ability, you can still allow him to exist in a tournament setting where he's doing his job, which is punishing people who have greedy lists or trying to hunt down lists that are trying to be a little bit too consistent by running monocolored lists. Something like that. I don't think he's actually so strong that he needs any kind of ban, errata, or restriction. If any of those things were to happen, I would expect that it would be some sort of errata, probably around how his ability works, and I would leave that to someone more creative than myself to figure out exactly what changes you would do there. But I don't think he would ever see a point change. I don't think he could be restricted. I do think, however, that if any character I did list would be banned, it might actually be Kylo, because unlike Sabine, who you could really, really tweak to the point where she's not a problem, I think if you don't want to change Kylo's mechanic, he might be the only card that's irreversible in what he does. So let's circle back, and I'm going to talk about
out of all the cards I listed, the ones that are most likely to get hit. So I think the ones that are most likely to get hit are Second Chance. In fact, I think Second Chance just will be hit. I think Force Illusion could be hit. I think Force Speed could be hit. I think that Shoto actually might get hit. I think that Easy Pickings might be hit. I think that CQA will be hit. I think that Sabine will get changed in some fashion. And I think it's fairly likely that both Ayla and Yoda get changed. Now, just as a general disclaimer for everything I've said, this all only applies if a holocron would come out before Way of the Force. If the holocron was released alongside Way of the Force, it would completely change how all these things would happen, because a lot of these problematic cards could get balanced out by having villains getting stronger, or maybe just ranged weapons getting stronger to balance out cards like Ancient and Shoto. So this whole list is really incumbent upon the fact that this holocron would come out in, I would say, the next month, which honestly I think is pretty likely. Alright, well that's going to wrap up this Versus episode. If you guys have any comments, questions, you think I was just wrong, feel free to email me at crawwormgaming@gmail.com. That's CRAWWURM gaming@gmail.com. And until next time, don't roll anything I wouldn't.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join us on all of our social media outlets. And a big thank you to all of our Patreons for your support. We can't do this without your help, so make sure to join us for all of our exclusive Knights of Ren content.